I am a biotic god. I think things, and they happen. Fear me, lesser creatures, for I am Biotics made flesh.
Hey everyone, Complex back with another video, and today we're gonna go back to the Mass Effect universe and continue our lore series. And well, let's talk about biotics. Now, biotics are the Mass Effect universe's version of magic, but well, actually explained within the science of the game. There are different kinds of biotics depending on the species that you are, but essentially it's an organic life form that's able to create a Mass Effect field using EZO, which is element 0, that's been embedded within their body tissue. If you remember from our last video, which was what is Mass Effect fields are created when EZO is manipulated by electricity. In the case of an organic life form, their own brain's electrical current is actually providing the electricity that's needed in order to create the dark energy. If you want to know more about Mass Effect fields and Mass Effect overall, I will link the last video in the description down below. Now, before we dive into biotics themselves, here's a fun little fact for you. Biotics is an actual word that means having to do with life or living organisms. It can also mean produced or caused by living organisms, which, well, sums up biotics and Mass Effect really well. Now, when it comes to being a biotic, there are two different ways that you can be one. One is to be born as an Asari, and the other is to be exposed to EZO when in utero. Let's first dive into the Asari side of being a biotic. Asaris are naturally biotics because of their home planet of Thessia. Thessia is a planet that is very rich in EZO to the point where it's laced in the water and other natural resources. Because of this, Asari are born with natural biotic abilities, as EZO is just naturally within their systems. An Asari can choose whether or not they want to train their biotic abilities, and in either case never need an implant to use them, as if they do decide to go with formal training, all that's really going to do is teach an Asari how to have and use a conscious neural connection for their abilities. The most formidable Asari that you'll come across in the biotic department is called a commando. When it comes to being a biotic for the other species, however, they have to be exposed to EZO dust in utero. This then can potentially cause EZO nodules throughout the nervous system to start to develop. Those nodules are, when they get controlled by electrical impulses from the brain, what creates the Mass Effect fields. However, just because someone is exposed to EZO in utero doesn't guarantee that they'll have biotic abilities. Quite the opposite in some cases. They can actually end up developing brain tumors or other health problems or physical complications. Now, when it comes to the other alien races, such as Batarian, Drell, Volus, and Vorcha, they can all have biotics, but not much is really known about them other than they do exist, and they're generally going to be an adept or a vanguard. However, when we get into the topic of Turians, Krogans, and Solarians, things are a little different and get a little bit more interesting. For instance, a Krogan Battlemaster is a Krogan that has a biotic ability, and they're very rare and, well, were highly prized pre-Genophage when they had a substantial military. The reason for the rarity is that a surgical procedure was needed to help them confer their biotic abilities. However, this procedure hasn't commonly been done, if at all, since before the Genophage, as it has a very high mortality rate, and they couldn't risk losing any Krogan to it. When it comes to the Solarians, they prize their biotics. They are rare within the species themselves, but like I said, are prized, and generally end up working within the intelligence services as opposed to their military. When it comes to Turians, though, it's almost a little sad. Turians view their biotics with suspicion, and because of that, when they do their mandatory military service, they're actually put into a special unit called a Cabal. Now, the Cabals you really don't see or hear much from, but when the Reapers hit, they did end up bringing them out to defend Palaven. And we did meet one Turian biotic across the course of the 3 games, and that was Nyrene from the Omega DLC within ME3. As for Quarians, they have biotics. They are just probably one of the most rare kinds of biotics you'll find. Between their environmental suits, the rarity of EZO itself, living on the migrant fleet, and their very weak immune systems means it's highly unlikely that an expectant mother would actually come into contact with EZO dust. To touch briefly on Mass Effect Andromeda, despite the fact that we went to the Helios cluster specifically for its high EZO content, we never met an Andromeda species with biotic abilities. The Angara, as far as we know, have no biotics, and the Ket, after meeting the Asari and learning about biotics, decided to try to start working it into their genome. Now let's talk about human biotics. The first human biotic was born after a starship accident that happened in 2150 that dispersed a large amount of EZO dust over a very populated area. And just for some reference, the first contact war happened in 2157 and Commander Shepard was born in 2154. Biotics and their abilities weren't recognized right away. However, the first known human biotic was called Subject White and had a violent history. It wasn't until most of these kids were teenagers that humans, after having made contact with the Citadel and learning what EZO dust exposure in utero can result in, that we started to learn about biotics. It was because of this that a company called Kinetics Industries was founded, their purpose being to track down these possible biotics and develop an implant for humans. At this point, there are very heavy and more than likely true rumors that some human colonies were deliberately exposed to EZO dust in order to create more children with biotic potential. Now, because humans aren't naturally biotics, kind of like an Asari, they need something called an implant in order to amplify their biotic abilities and actually make them viable. Now, these biotic implants are generally implanted during puberty, and we've gone through a series of implants throughout the course of human biotics, starting with an L1 and going as high as the L5X and L5N implant. The first implants were created by Dr. Ellen Ryder, who is Pathfinder Ryder's mother in Mass Effect Andromeda, and this leaves a very, very plausible reason as to why either one or both of the twins would be biotics. Now, a little history into the implants. The L1 implant left biotics able to manipulate small objects, but their biotics were never going to be offensively viable. The first viable implant was the L2 implant. However, these implants produced some wildly varied results. Some biotics were able to be barely more powerful than if they had had an L1 implant, and others were strong but very unstable. Cade Nolenko talks in depth about being an L2 biotic, and you meet others throughout the course of ME1 that are also L2 implants, and you kind of learn about some of the plights that they've suffered because of being an L2 implant due to the fact that they suffer from a lot of different physical ailments. However, in 2170, the L3 implant was developed. These were consistently stable and gave the users a moderately strong ability. Their maximum strength was less than the max strength of an L2 implant, but they were much safer for the user and didn't have the same dangerous side effects. Because of this, the L3 implants were able to be given to biotics later in life comparatively to the L2 and L1 implants. Commander Shepard, if a biotic, was given an L3 implant around 2171, making them about 16 to 17 years old at the time. There are cases of L2 biotics that tried to upgrade to an L3 implant. Some were successful, some were not, and it wasn't done as often because there was a huge risk of brain damage that came with the surgery. Now, there's also an L4 implant, and these were mainly used on children in the Ascension project. These had a built-in VI that would enable external monitoring of the biotic and be able to enhance the user's abilities. This implant gave users a boost over the L3s about 90% of the time with no current side effects that are known. Now, in 2185, we had developed the L5 implant that was divided into two separate implants. The L5X was meant for Adepts, and the L5N implant was meant for Vanguards. If your Shepard is a biotic in ME2 or ME3, they're outfitted with an L5 implant, as Cerberus upgraded the implant at the start of ME2. The most heartbreaking part of being a biotic is the mistrust and often hatred non-biotics have for human biotics. A lot of the population thought that biotics could read minds or even control them. However, the Alliance military welcomed biotics and actually provided massive enlistment incentives for them. Given how a human biotic is created, there are a variety of ways that Commander Shepard could have become a biotic and then enhanced their biotics over time. However, throughout the course of the games, you come across many powerful biotics, both human and alien, who all have unique stories about their journeys as a biotic. All of them interesting and to give a bit more insight into what it actually means to be able to wield dark energy at a moment's notice. And that is pretty much an overview of biotics and the Mass Effect universe. As you can see, a lot of thought and careful planning went into creating biotics, from literally how they're formed within the nervous system, to the use of EZO, to even how different alien races could possibly become a biotic. What's even more interesting is that we learn a bit about how each of the different races view their biotics within a societal standpoint. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this look into what makes biotics in the Mass Effect universe, and I will catch you next lore video. Bye, guys!